A hearty welcome to our 162nd edition of Europe Calling. I am Maximilian. I'm the Managing Director of Europe Calling, and I would like to extend a special welcome to our guests today. I shall be introducing them later. Yeah, but you can see them on the screen already. To choose your preferred language, please click on Interpretation in the control panel and choose that language. I would like to inform you about housekeeping instructions. You will see on this slide what we are about to do today. We will first of all have some input statement of our four guest speakers. They will be taking something like 10 minutes each, and then you can raise your questions. We'll be using Slido, and you will have a link available in the chat in a second. And you can vote those questions up, and we shall take them in the debate. I would also like to thank our 1,267 patrons, those members who support us, and only because of your valuable support, we can offer Europe Calling for free to everyone, and the association can remain independent. And that's it. And now we shall start, properly speaking. I will introduce the topic. In 300 days, we will have European elections, and the discussion on the EU reform has picked up some speed. The EU Future Conference ended in May 2022, and the citizens proposed fundamental reforms. The discussion in public has been very quiet, but due to the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine, we do have a window of opportunity to perhaps talk in some depth and detail about the enlargement and reform. That is why Europe Calling has started a new series, the EU of the Future. And today we will be offering part one. We will be sharing with you the thoughts on the results of a Franco-German expert group, a group of 12. Two of them are here, Anna Lührmann, who with her colleague together created or launched the working group of experts, and Nguyen was also a member of the group. They will be reporting on the way the group worked, and then we shall call on Professor Nicolaidis and Huub Verhoeven further details. And that's what I had to say. And I would now like to pass the floor to Anna Lührmann. I look forward to your opening statements. Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you for the great interest that you all showed by joining this webinar. I shall start in German and then perhaps later on switch to English. To be honest, I'm really very happy that we now have the report of the German-French expert group before us. It has been published, and we launched this in January 2023 because we thought that it's very important to consider reforms in Europe or of the European Union, and we need to be able to enlarge the European Union. It makes it more stable and sustainable, but we need to be fit for this enlargement in order to take on new countries. So we need to be able to tell those candidate countries, we are ready when you are, when you've gone through all your reform steps too. My French colleague Laurence Beaune and myself, we said that we needed a whole set of new ideas and suggestions on how to change the European Union in such a way that it can absorb such new members. And the group, therefore, drafted a report which was made public at the beginning of the week, and we were also able to inform the member states during a lunch of an informal council meeting. And it was a very positive event, I have to say, because our colleagues welcomed the fact very much that we initiated such a group of experts to consider the ways forward for a reform. So they were very grateful, and they also said that we should really start this new debate. And that's what Maximilian said, because there wasn't very much momentum for this debate on a reform in the recent past. But now we will start this off because we need to prepare for a further enlargement. What I find particularly important are three things. We need to be able to show the progress and the successes of the European Union. We have to maintain the functionality or the functioning, the capacity to function as a European Union of perhaps 30 member states one day. And it is also important to further support democracy and the rule of law. Those principles should always be paramount for any consideration of taking on new member states. The group of experts has elaborated some very challenging and some very future-oriented and some very pragmatic recommendations. Some of them could actually be implemented immediately. Many of my colleagues in the Council always underline that the Treaty of Lisbon offers a certain flexibility. And they normally say the Lisbon Treaty is really enlargement proof. It is fit for such an enlargement. And I always reply to them, well, then let's try to actually apply it. Like, for example, enlarge the qualified majority voting to all the areas of decision taking. There's also a suggestion to open it up for the area of fiscal and tax policy or for defense and security concerns, which would be a rather huge step. So this is very, very interesting to look at in more detail on which steps to take, and Nguyen will probably enter into the details when she speaks. Then we need to protect the rule of law and the basic values of the European Union. I was rather surprised that the group put this quite at the center of the whole debate. They did say, watch out, we do have problems with the rule of law already, and we should make sure that the core values of the European Union not be changed fundamentally. And then the third thing that I would like to mention, and Huub will be very happy to hear that, is the thought or the recommendation to strengthen the citizens. A number of instruments are considered in the report. like, for example, the Citizens Initiative, but also citizens panels. They could probably be also introduced for the candidate countries. So there are very exciting proposals to be found in the report. I've only picked out 3 different proposals. Now we need to discuss that with the citizens in Europe and also in the candidate countries. And it is, of course, very clear that the EU enlargement needs to move forward, and we need to make the European Union fit for this enlargement. Thanks very much. Thank you. And I would now like to pass the floor to Tu. Thank you very much, Max. Perhaps I could do my input in English in order to facilitate the debate with Tu and Kalypso, Huub and Kalypso.
Tell a bit about how we worked in the group, how the process was, how also this Franco-German composition worked, and to give a bit of an overview over the recommendations that we have made. So perhaps I start a bit with how we worked. So Anna already said it, we were convened at the end of January. So this was 8 months. 8 months of work, and we met every 2 weeks online at least, and had a number of in-person meetings as well, because with 12 people it actually works a lot better if you are in the same room. And we discussed the topics in smaller subgroups. So each topic was discussed in the beginning or co-authored in the beginning in smaller Franco-German subgroups, but then subsequently debated and agreed upon in the entire group of 12. So we did this for every topic that we had. And what I really can say, and I think this was actually really, really great to realize, is that there wasn't any Franco-German division line at all in the group. So we really didn't see it. If there were division lines or disagreements or conflicts, it was really between individual experts in the group, so based on their own expertise, their own opinions, but we never saw a division line between the French members and the German members. And I also have to say that from the beginning, we also knew that this debate, that the enlargement debate and the reform debate is, of course, a European one. So we knew that this is a discussion that needs to be had across Europe, but also beyond Europe in the candidate countries, and that we would need to consider very different viewpoints and interests. So we also made an effort throughout the 8 months to engage with a lot of stakeholders, policymakers, experts from other member states and from candidate countries to also get an input from others while we worked on the topic. In the end, the report is not very long for the vast topic that institutional reforms is. It is incredibly large, so we had to make many choices, what to put in and what not to put in. Our discussions were guided by 3 principles, and Anna already mentioned them. We have them in this triangle. In the report, actually, we said the triangle and the principles that that guide our discussions are reforms that, or the question how to strengthen the capacity to act of the European Union, how to strengthen rule of law and democracy of the EU, and how to get the EU institutions enlargement ready. So these were the 3 guiding lines content-wise. And at the same time, we, of course, had a lot of discussions on how ambitious and visionary should we be, and how politically feasible the recommendation should be. So we discussed many, many more points and many more questions than what is in the report, and many points were dropped either because we thought they were outside of our mandate, so not actually institutional questions anymore, or because we thought the political mood at the moment is not one where we could see these points actually be implemented in the next years. So we said if we didn't see any realistic chance, we left it out. So it was always a balance between how ambitious will our recommendations be and how realistic also. So I think this is sort of how we worked and how we see this report is also as a contribution to the debate that is now starting or has started and is going to probably pick up even more before October and the European Council in December. As to the reforms that we propose, there is quite a few, but Anna already mentioned it. Very central to the report. And quite in the beginning is the rule of law. And I must say this is also something that developed actually throughout our discussions. So when we started in January, we didn't know yet that rule of law would be a separate chapter and not one of the many chapters. But through our discussions and throughout our discussions, we realized that it is quite central for the future of the European Union, and that reforms and that the future of the EU is centered around the question on how to protect the rule of law, not just on theoretical or moral grounds or because it is a value, but because it also has very practical impacts on how the EU functions and how the single market functions. No? How can the EU function if there is no independent courts in member states? So this is something that really materialized in our discussions. And Anna said it, we make a number of recommendations to strengthen the instruments to protect the rule of law, both within the treaties, but also through treaty change. And so throughout the report, we really have some reforms that can be done within the Treaty of Lisbon and others that will require change. And sometimes we list them as options. We say, well, the best way would be to change the treaties, but in the absence of an agreement on this, we propose other options that could be realized within the treaties. So we also try to propose different options for more feasibility. The other reforms are on what we consider 5 key areas for the EU's institutional functioning. And that is really making the EU institutions enlargement ready, decision-making in the Council, which is the QMV part Anna talked about, EU-level democracy, which also contains recommendation on citizens' participation and really also including citizens from candidate countries, powers and competences, and EU resources. So the budget. And I don't think I have time to zoom into everything. After the recommendations, we also actually have a section on how to get to treaty change, so sort of different ways and paths on how to get there beyond just the convention, just to sort of also have different paths laid out as to if we want treaty change, how do we get there? And we also propose some ways to make it possible for member states that would like to integrate more to form coalitions of the willing and to really move on with deeper integrations also in smaller groups of member states, where not all member states want to go at the same speed. And Anna already mentioned it for QMB, we do propose the extension of qualified majority voting to all policy areas. So we not to all decisions, but really policy decisions. But we do not, for example, propose QMV for changing the treaties or for the decision, the final decision to admit new members. So what we call constitutional decisions or decisions of a more constitutional nature. For those, we propose to retain unanimity. And how to get to QMV, we know, of course, that QMV is a very sensitive issue, in particular for smaller member states, because, of course, there's always their concern, a concern of being outvoted, perhaps being outvoted by larger member states, by France and Germany. So we propose to extend QMV, but to also combine it with 2 elements. One is a sovereignty safety net. We say if there is an issue that is of vital national interest to member state, a decision by QMV can be taken to refer to the European Council for further consideration. And the other one is also a rebalancing of the QMV shares, which basically is recalculation. And what the QMV team did was to look at the shares of the bigger member states to see what is the blocking minority also from France and Germany. How much percentage do they have? Can they form a blocking minority? How would that change if the EU enlarges? And then what we proposed is a different percentage for the QMV shares that would make it more difficult for larger member states to actually form a blocking minority. So to also give France and Germany less power to block decisions and to really change the QMV share in favor of smaller member states, to also maybe lessen a bit the concern that they could be outvoted by France and Germany. And I'm not sure how much time I still have. There's a number of other recommendations. For example, now until the European elections, we also make recommendations on the next elections for the European Parliament electoral rules, for the the selection of the Commission President. We also make recommendations as to the size and the organization of the Commission after enlargement, the size and composition of the European Parliament after enlargement. So there's a number of recommendations, some really for now, some for later, some within the treaties, and some by changing the treaties. But I think I will stop here for now, and then maybe we come back to the some other recommendations with throughout the discussion.
Thank you very much. I'm just switching my language now too, so I can speak English. Thank you very much. I just wanted to, because where you stopped, I think one thing that Anna mentioned as well, and that I think will be quite relevant for the discussion that we're gonna have, is the topic of citizen participation and stronger participation, actually. So could you maybe lose a couple of words, maybe a minute or two, on a bit more detail on what you're proposing there as a group?
Yes, so of course, as a follow-up to the Conference of Europe, we had a lot of discussions on how to strengthen European democracy and also how to strengthen participatory democracy, and how to make the link between participation and representation, which we think is really one of the most interesting challenges for democracy. So we propose, or we say that existing participatory instruments should be tied more closely to EU decision-making to really strengthen them, including citizens panels, and also to have EU-wide citizens panels, which should be institutionalized, just to also have more visibility and really more discussions surrounding not just policy discussions, but also discussions that we have right now on treaty reforms or enlargement, and really also to ensure that this is not just a debate that happens between member states or between experts or between in the EU institutions, but one that takes with them citizens, not just in the European Union, but also in the candidate countries. So really also as an instrument to prepare the citizens and to prepare the wider society, I don't know how to call it, really the all actors in this process of reforming the EU, but also enlarging the EU. So we also see it as an instrument really to prepare for enlargement and to make it an inclusive process for everyone, both in the member states and in the candidate countries.
Right. Thank you very much. And I will just continue with Kalypso Nicolaidis. She's a full professor at the European University Institute in the School of Transnational Governance, and chair, and I have to read it out because it's chair of the high-level working group of bolstering the EU democracy, together with the Center of the European Policy Studies and the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik in Germany. And a little bird has informed me that they had a meeting just before, and they may have agreed on recommendations as well. So I'm really excited to hear, Kalypso, what you think about the Franco-German expert group proposals, also in light what you may have discussed just in the meeting before, and maybe also just to say Kalypso is also working very actively on a project called Democratic Odyssey for Europe, which is also about a lot of citizen participation, and also very curious to hear about that. Maybe not in the beginning, but maybe in the discussion. Kalypso, great you're here.
Thank you, Max, for having listened to the little birds. We should always listen to birds. And indeed, you're right. Why am I here? There are many, many wonderful people around Europe who can speak to this great report. But in part, yes, I chair, if you want, the parallel group. CEPS helped in both of these groups. And I think we all share a sense that the coming European elections are going to be the enlargement elections, rethinking the EU because of enlargement. And so our two groups are like the yin and the yang. They are complementary. This group wrote a report, as you just heard from Anna and Tu, really on institutional reform, how to get ready, capable of being a bigger union. And our group concentrated more on kind of democracy seen from the citizens, but also and using much more transparency and ways of accessing power for citizens, because at the end of the day, democracy is about who can access power. So our two groups go together. They have some overlap, and I'm here to speak a bit about the bridge, but also perhaps I will disappoint you, Max, in that I will not disagree with anything that Anna and Tu said or what I read in the content of the report, but perhaps push a couple of questions that our audience might be interested in. Because why I won't disagree, because as Anna made it very clear at the beginning, the ambition of the report that, how do we now think about what is an obstacle to being more effective in the union, and especially given the Ukraine war, we need to be out there and effective. But also, I also applauded because in spite of being very ambitious, very pragmatic, and I think Tu's presentation made it very clear, it's pragmatic. What concretely can we do? And this is what we need. So let me first start with saying that while I agree, and most of us might feel sympathetic to what we just heard, there are at least 3 constituencies out there who might, we can ask about them and what you do with them. So first of all, the member state governments. Now, of course, we have Anna representing the German government and of course the French government, but a lot of the report, you have this wonderful way of saying gradation, you might need treaty change or not, but we understand that governments kind of just want to do things. They're wary of all these big discussions on treaty change. So, I was intrigued, Anna, that your colleagues were very interested that you had the working group, but how interested are they in revising, even short of treaty change, so governments being pragmatic? That's different from the European Parliament, who has itself issued a big report, the AFCO report, very ambitious, and will applaud many of those things. Now, that's the first question. Governments, they really want this. Secondly, this is France and Germany. I myself have a Franco-German mom, so I'm all for France, Germany. But you know what? Most other member states, they're a bit wary when France and Germany get together and tell them this is what we decide together, even though it's just a working group. So one question is, how do we deal with always the fear of other member states, smaller, more peripheral, at the east, in the south, also Greece and Spain and Portugal, etc. Ownership of what you recommend. And then the third constituency is the title of this amazing series that has been going on now for quite a while, Power to the People. Yes, there's all these very interesting, and Huub will have more to say about this, recommendation on power to the people. But, how do we get there? And can we go even further? And should we go further? Because after all, governments are very skeptical about power to the people. What do they know? They're not experts. In my view, the greatest claim to expertise is your experience in your life. But not everybody thinks that way. So that's the first series of questions. Now, let me just specifically zoom in on the 3 areas which Anna laid out and 2 picked up. The first is, of course, this question of qualified majority voting. And I think we can all agree that it's more efficient not to have unanimity, to give up veto, as you explain, in foreign affairs and in fiscal issues. But there are good reasons why this hasn't happened, although we've been talking about this for so many years, and I would say decades, is, of course, one is that small states are wary because the only power they have is their little veto. Now, 2 gave us this really interesting explanation of how the group tries to make qualified majority voting more friendly to these small member states. And that's maybe your response. But nevertheless, we do have a challenge. It's never going to go away. In a union that's not just one big country, how do we protect the fears? Maybe they're wrong fears, but they are fears of many small states or medium-sized states to be, control dominated by the big ones, especially France and Germany, but also the Polands of this world. So there is this underlying question. And of course, you have that response of changing QMV. You also have another response, sovereignty safety net. But then we can ask you, well, okay, that means, member states say, my sovereignty is too important. Okay, but maybe you can explain to Anna, to our audience, what does that mean, a sovereignty? Is it a bit like a veto? And then we're back to square one. So under what conditions something is kosher is really sovereignty, and other times it's not. Who decides? Is it that member state? Is it the group of member states? It would be great if you explain to us. I mean, I know there's more in the report, but just for our audience, and there would be more to say here. And also the last question on this question of the unanimity versus majority, how states decide, is you then say, well, there should be concentric circles of countries, the core group, and then there is those who are in the Eurozone, there is, the EU, and then there is the associate members, and then there is the bigger Europe, the European political community. But we also have known for a long, long time that Europe is not quite that way, that there are states that might be in Schengen, but not in other. It's not like circles like this, it's overlapping circles. A state might be a core because it's really military, but not a core because it's not Eurozone, etc. Or on Schengen and free movement. Is it that simple, these concentric circle? And it seems a bit hierarchical. Do we really want to go back to that image? That might be one area of does our audience really see Europe that way, in these concentric circle? Isn't that a bit centric? Isn't that a bit, arrogant from France and Germany to view Europe that way? But you can see here, I'm just trying to provoke a bit for the discussion. And the final point about QMV, yes, it's important. We may care, but I wonder if our audience out there really cares about how decisions are made in these obscure room that they don't have access to. We might think this is really important, but for the citizen, do they care about this question of QMV unanimity? Just an issue. The second point that you've raised is I'm almost done, Max, but the rule of law, and your report is so good on stressing how if we have a budget, we might as well make it conditional on member states respecting our values, and you want to generalize that, and that is great. But I wonder why there isn't more there in again, who decides and how we decide. There are the national reports on the rule of law that maybe criticized more. They're very different, and a member state like France escapes very easily, although judicial The judicial has problems in France. So, of course, we have problems with Poland and Hungary. But is that all? No, all member states are treated equally there, but are they? So that's just a question, lots to say about. I wrote a whole book called The Citizen's Guide to the Rule of Law. So I very much like you care about this issue and approve of everything you write there, but wanted to push you on that. And finally, Max, you raised very rightly for me the third big kind of point, participatory democracy, more voice to the citizens, especially on enlargement. And I think we can all agree with the report, what it says there. And I want to stress for everyone listening that those of you who might have followed Huub, who was such an amazing participant, ordinary citizen at the Conference on the Future of Europe, and we remember your speeches, Huub, will applaud to make citizens panel institutionalized. One question is, are we ready to go one step further and create a standing assembly, a permanent standing assembly of citizen panels together at the EU level that might meet all around Europe, but that would not be created here and there, but really a permanent one? That's what my democratic odyssey that you had the very kindness to mention, Max, is all about. So, I will put in the chat, or we will let you know if you're interested in knowing more. But I think we need to push more the idea that in the context of enlargement, countries like Bosnia, Serbia, Kosovo, Albania should have lots of citizens' assemblies, and they can then in turn meet with the country that has the presidency, that we can encourage a whole ecosystem in the applying member states to connect with the EU, not just through their government, but through their citizens, meeting with our citizens, and then issuing their voice. Now, what that voice would do in Europe is another, and the last big question I pose here. How far are we ready to go in committing to taking in, to giving real impact to these citizens' recommendations? That is a very difficult question, because in Europe, neither the Parliament nor the Council have a final word. Everybody's sharing power. But how far are we ready to go on this? And I know this is something that Huub really is also concerned with.
Thank you so much, Kalypso. I feel we have to extend the webinar by at least 4 hours to answer all those questions. But thank you so much. We will hopefully get a lot through them. Actually, we have a lot of citizens' questions already that are going to this direction. So it's really, you hit the proverbial nail on the head here, and also made a wonderful bridge to Verhoeven is a Dutch, or was a Dutch member, randomly chosen citizen for the Conference for the Future of Europe, the Future Conference, and he has been very outspoken. We've heard he's been applauded for his speeches in the plenary, and has also signed a letter just last December, really, with strong words towards the Commission and the Council, not being very happy how everything went on after the Conference of Future of Europe finished. So I'm super excited, Huub, that you're here, and you may share with us your views on this report, and maybe also the way forward as a citizen's view. Huub, great to have you.
Yes, thank you, Max, for your invitation and for your introduction. So, as mentioned, I've been part of the Conference on the Future of Europe exercise as a citizen ambassador. And on the 9th of May last year, so I looked it up 500 days ago exactly, the conference came to a conclusion where a report with 49 proposals was created, which is quite a list. And we knew back then that there were multiple proposals that needed a lot of political ambition to be implemented. For example, some required that the treaties be amended, like Two already mentioned. Well, that's a bit more complicated than what Two mentioned, but looking back so far, it is good to see that deliberate democracy is still on the European agenda. So far, 3 more citizens panels have concluded since COFO, with many more planned. This month, it has become apparent that there's a lot of willpower to see the proposals become reality. It makes me happy to see that the Conference on the Future of Europe has not been forgotten and it is being taken seriously. The Franco-German working group is one of the many examples that show this. And it's good that there are experts being asked to investigate the proposals and the implementations of these. It is also good to hear, like Tu mentioned, that there was a big focus on the feasibility of the proposals in the coming years. The report shows promising ideas, which give me faith that the proposals will one day be worked out into real legislation. And furthermore, prove that this exercise of citizen deliberation is adding value to our democracy and improving politics. The fact that there are 6 ways to go about treaty change mentioned in the report says something about the precision and depth of the working method of this working group. Not only the fact that qualified majority voting seems like a real possibility now, it has been one of the biggest proposals of COFO to make sure that Europe can act more decisive and remove tools that take conversations and discussions hostage and block the possibility of decisions being made. Also, the fact that there has been thought put into opt-outs that are designed in a way that prevent abuse, as we unfortunately have seen some of our member states that are on the lookout for this. We need to make sure that our core European values are not corrupted. Qatargate has shown the world that both corruption is possible in the EU, as well as that the world is noticing the EU has a lot of power. Else they would not have bothered to corrupt it. Therefore, the recommendation of creating an independent office for transparency is good to have for the continuous fight against corruption. On the subject of creating an EU political community to provide cooperation without being bound to EU law, I think it's good and hopeful for the citizens that have been affected by Brexit. At least that's what I hope. Like I have just told you, the report shows promising recommendations. All that I've read in it, I agree with it. It is good to hear you mention citizen participation. This is a big step forward, in my opinion. And the first thing that came to my mind after reading the report is the fact that it sounds promising, but it does not mean it will become reality. This is not this has not much to do with the report itself, but what I want to share is a fear that many citizens that have participated also share. A little bit over 9 months ago, like you mentioned, Max, I've sent on behalf of all the citizen participants an open letter to both the European Council and Commission. The letters contained over 80 signatures of participants of COFO. The goal of these letters was to put pressure on the EU institutions to make sure that the proposals will be implemented. As the feedback session back then itself did not provide much trust. This week, we plan to send another letter to the Spanish presidency as part of making sure that the recommendations are not forgotten. Next to reports like the Franco-German one, we need to keep pressure on the politicians to make sure the proposals are not forgotten and will be implemented. Even the ones that require a lot of political ambition, like amending the treaties, because there will always be a reason why tomorrow is a better day to start, but I think today is a great day as well. Society is evolving fast, our democracy should do so as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Huub. That was a great citizen's view on that. And now we have many questions. I've also put the link to the open letter in the chat. So if anyone wants to read it, it's also very interesting to read. And so I would maybe propose that we'll just do it because I'm a moderator, so I can decide. We'll just maybe go through the questions. Actually, I think Kalypso raised, which also connecting very much to what Huub also said, and I will rope in voices from the audience into that. And the very first one is actually a question in German, and I will just translate translated from someone who didn't give his name. So please give your names. That's always nicer. So the first citizen question is, how could the pathway to the qualified majority voting actually succeed? So what could be potential steps in between? And he says, you know, from a citizen's view, this is long overdue. And then connected to this, the second question here on Slido is from Leonard, and he asks, so what does the German government actually say and the French government actually say to the proposal to change the weighing or the weights of the votes of the member states in the council? That is not to the benefit of Germany and France, actually reducing their relative voice. So that is a direct question, I would say, to Anna. So interested to hear also what Kalypso asked in terms of, you know, what do the other member states think about those proposals and QMV, maybe over lunch.
Yeah, thank you. You're well. I mean, it doesn't come as a surprise to you that neither the German nor the French government has a position on this. As you said, if you look back at the last rounds of treaty change, German and French governments have fought for the opposite, right? So. But I think that's not really the point here. The point is, first, I think actually the inclusion of this shows very nicely that this is not a report that is sort of commissioned by the French and German government just to report what has always been French and German government position, right? So, and secondly, I mean, we need to, as always in Europe, we need to find a package that is good for everyone, right? And you know, if you just ask me as a European citizen, but also as a German government representative, I'm open for using QMV in many areas. But I know that others view that differently, and particularly others also from smaller member states. So we have to find some way of addressing concerns, and we need to find some way in the end to reach a balanced compromise where everyone can see themselves. And here the report makes a number of suggestions with the safety net, and then also there's other proposals. So therefore, I think it's quite a useful sort of collection of ideas. And I know that others will add some ideas here as well. Yeah, what was your first question again?
That was partly answered with that. I think it was about the citizen asked about the steps, and this is also something that
exactly.
as well. So where do we go from here? I mean, on QMV, but also on the other proposals.
Right. So I think the important thing is that we actually start going, right? So that we don't just sit back and say, okay, well, you know, let's first get those accession countries to be ready, and then we'll start thinking about how we will deal with it as EU, but rather that we actually start talking about this, how we do our homework. And here we have really this fall a lot of very exciting meetings coming up. So next week I'm going to Spain for an informal General Affairs Council meeting where we will discuss about this topic for a long time. The heads of state and government will also meet in Granada in a few weeks to also talk about this topic of getting ready for enlargement. And then we have a big European Council meeting, so with the heads of state and government coming up in December. And our ambition is that this European Council sends a clear signal that enlargement and reform needs to go hand in hand. And ideally even that at some point before the end of this term, we show that we're actually ready to use this passerelle clause for qualified majority voting. And, you know, this is basically, the passerelle basically is in the existing treaties. So it means that you can go to qualified majority voting in a number of areas without changing the treaty. You just need a unanimity to achieve that. So a lot more easy. But as I said, I mean, we're working already. We have narrowed areas down that are where more countries feel comfortable with. For instance, human rights reports in the field of foreign policy. Yeah? And I think it would be super important to demonstrate this so-called flexibility of the Lisbon Treaty that those that are opposing treaty change are always talking about, to really demonstrate this rather early in the process, right? And as I said, there are others have other ideas, and we need to start talking now about some sort of a package that we can reach, and I think that we should have like a first initial steps rather sooner than later.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe then also to two, when it comes to QMV, I mean, one of the questions was here regarding the safety nets. What are the details here that you propose? How such a sovereignty safety net would actually look like? Who decides, and is it going to be like a veto 2.0, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yes. First of all, I'm very happy to hear, Kalypso, that you didn't disagree on anything in the report. That is very great to hear. I think that your question on the sovereignty safety net is a very good one. And basically, we model it after Article 31.2 of the Treaty on the European Union, so something that already exists, to also make it more feasible in implementation and not to come up with something new. And how it works is that if a member state considers an issue a vital national interest, it can ask to transfer to the European Council, but this transfer would have to be decided by the Council with QMV. So it's not a second veto, but an ask to the other member states to transfer this to the European Council because it is so important to the member state. And I think, Kalypso, you also asked, why should citizens care about something like QMV and how the Council votes and their obscure numbers? And maybe they don't care about whether it's 60% or 65% or what the exact numbers are of the calculations of the QMV shares. But I think that they care and that they should care on whether the EU is efficient, whether you can act, and whether decisions can be blocked by individual member states. Because the transfer from, or the move away from unanimity is, of course, also always related to the question of whether decisions should be able to be blocked by one individual member state, or whether there should be a larger coalition between decisions and a change in the way that negotiations are conducted at the European level. And I think this is actually quite an important question that really underlies also this capacity to act and increasing efficiency, that maybe is not so much about the numbers. And Anna is very, very correct here, that this is, of course, this is just one suggestion of many to come, and the numbers can shift. And there's also QMV and unanimity, it's not binary, right? So there's so much in between. So there's so many ideas and ways to calculate this, and so many proposals to make. But I think the very underlying question of whether the European Union can act, whether the Council can take decisions, I think it's a very vital one that should concern everyone as a matter of fact. And I don't know, Max, if you would like me to answer the other questions, or if we move thematically, I can also wait.
Let's stick with the QMV question for a moment. I'm actually just going through the question and trying to see whether citizens here have further thoughts on this. I mean, I think the key question you actually answered to. So maybe yes, maybe we actually go further, and I will just give the word to Kalypso again, and maybe to it was your question in a way. What do you think? Is that a good idea in like the safety net is proposed here, to do this then also by QMV, so by majority voting? And is that answer good for you? Sufficient?
To a great extent, yes. And as Tu said, it's pragmatic. It's already something out there. And just to translate for some of those listening, you know, the EU is full of all these committees at different levels of regulators, bureaucrats, diplomats from the member states, and then the COREPER, the ambassadors in Brussels. And these committees, so partly I think what Tu and Anna are telling us is, even there is blockage when there is veto. So they're saying, well, you know, the safety, it's not as though it would mean that you can just do what you want, the sovereignty net, right? But, you know, it's the members, it's the heads of states in the European Council who are going to have to take that responsibility. It becomes highly political if one member state says, no, I don't like this decision. And I want to stress one thing here on the topics, because people always come back to foreign policy and military. But as Anna said right from the beginning, the group is also talking about the fiscal dimension. And very importantly, the issuance of debt. You know, it's quite a new thing for the EU since this new big fund of 750 billion euros called the Next Generation Fund was created. That now at last, the EU, not as the member states, can issue debt to the world. Now, one day it will have to repay this debt, and we're all asking, well, how will it repay? A tax on corporation, a tax on carbon, whatever it is. But it's still important. Issues of taxes is what, you know, ever since our states have been created, we care about our taxes. How much we give in taxes, how our taxes are spent, you know, is this, all of these issues, right? So to say that a government of a member state, maybe not everyone in that member state, but a government can be put in a minority on this is quite critical. I mean, it's sensitive, so we need to understand why it's sensitive and why it's important too, because this whole committee is about capacity to act. And capacity to act, as we say in France, l'argent est le nerf de la guerre. If you don't have the money, you can't act. So just to kind of, Max, to say, you know, there's a lot at stake in this story. It's not just some obscure, you know, decision-making method that no one cares about.
Thank you very much. I want to take Huub in there, actually, Huub, because I think one of the big things. I mean, first of all, I mean, you kind of answered one of the questions of Kalypso by saying that QMV actually was, and majority voting was very much at the top of the list when it comes to the Conference for the Future of Europe, and actually, I have to. No, I now lost the thread I wanted to ask. Right. No, I know what to ask. I wanted to switch actually to the citizen participation with you, Huub, and because this is something I actually had to look up, because you said there were already 3 citizens panels past Conference Future Europe, and I could maybe ask, who knows of the people here what the 3 topics of those citizens panels were? I don't. And I think this is part of, I mean, this is kind of describing the problem. So Huub, do you know, and in how much have you followed them? What actually came out of them?
So these were a bit smaller scale because they were, this could be off technically, but I believe they were initiated by the Commission, if I'm correct. But the topics were food waste, cyber security, I believe, and the other one I forgot. But they were smaller scale, I believe.
Well, the last one was about Erasmus and to study abroad and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the focus was, because one of the issues with COFO, or one of the critics, was that the subjects were way too broad, because you could go all directions. So therefore, these panels had a bit of a closer scope, like food waste. It's quite specific. And what was your other question?
No, that was actually my question, and the question is, when you hear about what Kalypso, for example, for permanent representation, is this something that in the conference you discussed, and are you actually confident that, you know, after the experience that the Commission made those rather small topics with very little, actually, I mean, there were only 3 meetings of them. So how confident are you that the Commission is actually, you know, going further with that and would be open to what is proposed, more like a permanent assembly?
Well, first of all, the COFO itself for the most of the participants was also 3 sessions. So with ambassador, with a smaller group, we had to discuss with the parliament and the other institutions, and that's what took a lot of the time. So I'm not sure what to think about having a smaller subject, because I think it's very helpful in directing the conversation, but I think this way some subjects could be left out, so there is some golden balance in there. And about permanent representation, I'm not sure exactly in what form that should be, because then you would say, like, you have a permanent body that does this, but how often do the people get chosen, and how do we secure that it's randomly done? Because that was also one of the critics of COFO. So it's I think it's a great idea, but I'm not sure about how to exactly implement it.
Thank you very much, and I would actually like to give that back to Chu now, and because a lot of people now asking in on Slido as well. So you mentioned the panels, the citizen panels. Then, so what exactly are you proposing in the report? And then I would love to hear then also Anna on this actually, because, you know, looking at the 3 small panels, this might not be the way forward.
So basically, we propose to really use citizens panels more, to engage citizens more, and also to link them, for example, to council presidencies. So to say each council presidency also organize citizen panels, to also link really citizens' participations with how the institutions work, right? Because at the end of the day, it must go hand in hand. So it can't be a parallel structure, but it's really also the question of how can you link citizens' participation and citizens' panels to the way that the institutions themselves work. And then again, how can you link the discussions in the member states and by the citizens in member states also to the citizens in the candidate countries, to already ensure that there's also convergence of discussions and of viewpoints before we enlarge.
And how would this link to the institutions? I read this as well, and I couldn't really get a clear picture of it. So, I mean, thinking about the European Parliament with all the committees working there, would that mean that there are 2 members of this assembly then sit with the European Parliament and kind of, you know, as a citizen's voice in the committee and maybe in a vote? Or how do you think about linking it?
For example, I mean, we don't make very, very explicit recommendations. But for example, one idea or one proposal we have is that, again, each council presidency could organize panels on their priorities and basically consult the citizens on their priorities for the half year and for the presidency. So also get an input on what citizens think, but also to strengthen their outreach, right? So also, for example, to explain what they do in the council presidency to the citizens panel. So that would, for example, be one way to link the council to the citizens panels. The same thing could be done, for example, around the commission president State of the Union address. So again, maybe link this yearly speech to a citizens panel, get the input from the citizens. What do they think is important in the year to come, looking back in the year, and also again to outreach to the citizens. So I think what we propose is really these different stages where the institutions work and how they work and how they decide. Perhaps there is a way to then organize more closely discussions with the citizens at certain points in time during the decision-making processes or discussion points by the institutions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And maybe Anna on this as well. So what do you think about this kind of linking in this proposal, and what then also do you think about what Kalypso teased here about more permanent representation of a bigger?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Kalypso also said that why would governments be interested in sort of these kind of citizen panels and citizen participation? And I think it's very clear. I mean, democratic governments, good governments need to understand what their citizens want, particularly in highly contested issues, and are also looking permanently also for new ideas, new policy suggestions. And I think this is an area where citizens panels can actually have a role that is also needed in the governance process. I think looking back at the conference on the future of Europe, and Huub, correct me if you think that's a wrong assessment, but I think the task was given. I mean, it was the whole future, right? It was super big. It was like this super, like you could. I mean, we were talking about animal welfare, artificial intelligence, QMV, war in Ukraine. I mean, it was really everything. And I mean, that's also one of the things that I did before going back to politics 2 years ago. I was a scholar actually working a lot on democratic participation. And one of the key guiding principles that I developed there is that this participation has to be meaningful and cannot be tokenistic, right? That's sort of the main idea. So not just sort of a nice picture with some citizens standing there talking about broad issues, but actually a meaningful participation on a precise question with a precise idea of how this then feeds into the political process. And this can be done in several ways. I think two, and the expert group has outlined one, for instance, to link it to council presidency priorities, because this is what they are dealing with then during their presidency. That's really interesting, also new idea. The other one is what the Commission currently does, is to actually have citizen panels on very precise questions. Then they maybe don't appear that much in public, but if they're done right, and I think in this case, sometimes they're not done fully right, if they're done right and they're done at the beginning of a legislative process where it's really meaningful to get some fresh ideas, like it, or in a highly contested issue, like they did in Ireland with abortion, right? This was a highly contested issue in the Irish society, and the citizen panel really managed to find a good solution to this question that both sides could live with, and that was later then accepted also in a referendum. So yes, we need more citizen panels with precise mandates linked to a very precise and from the get-go a very precise definition of where they're linked to the decision-making process. And therefore, I also think it would be better to have not to have permanent citizen panel, because I think a permanent one, then what's the difference between the mandate of a permanent citizen panel and a parliament, right? I mean, a parliament is elected for 4 or 5 years with representatives. And I think the role of a citizen panel is differently. It needs to be randomly selected people, and one of the main added values that I also saw from discussing with the German citizen panel, national citizen panel for the conference on the future of Europe, is that you really have people with a lot of fresh ideas and that haven't gone through these whole hoops of the whole political process yet. And I think I'm a bit afraid we would lose that if we would institutionalize it, and then people would be selected for 5 years for a citizen panel, and then also who can take 5 years for being there in a citizen panel and on a volunteer basis. So therefore, I'm a bit more for, okay, you're shaking your head, so maybe your idea is differently, but therefore my idea is really clear mandate, clear link to the political process, and then more of it, and as Tu said, also involving citizens of candidate countries. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe Kalypso on that topic of democracy, and then we wrote more citizens in.
No, indeed, because I agree with everything Anna just said, and Tu said earlier about why this is so important to have randomly selected citizens, the fresh ideas. We talk about collective intelligence that is everywhere, and also citizens randomly selected and staying in there not too long cannot be captured, cannot be corrupted as easily. There are many good reasons why this is so important. And indeed, Anna, I completely agree with you that if it was just to have a parliament too with randomly citizens, that would not work. So the idea of why it's important to have a standing body is that, when two describes the presidencies, it could be very arbitrary. One presidency might do it, another might not do it. One commission and a commissioner, head of the commission might like it, others not. There is a risk of cherry picking. So there's a risk of just deciding arbitrarily whether you want to ask the citizens or not. And indeed, later on, even when they come to recommendation, one of Huub's big fear is that there's cherry picking of what the citizens recommend, which of course, not everything can be taken as such. But so the idea of a standing assembly is that indeed there would be rotating citizens. So those nominated there would be there for 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 months. Just like now the permanent assembly in Brussels for climate change, for instance. So there's a few permanent assemblies, and that's what would happen. But then it wouldn't meet like a parliament. It might meet in a smaller configuration and meet with, the Portuguese presidency or the Spanish presidency or the Latvian presidency. So all of the recommendations that this working group has come up with would work with a standing assembly. But the assembly would be there. And one moment it would comment on the State of the Union, like Ursula gave us this very inspiring speech a few days ago. Well, the assembly would say something beforehand. Another moment it would meet with the presidency and the recs of the presidency. Another moment it would take one controversial issue. And as you talked about abortion in Ireland, maybe one moment it takes on refugees in Europe. What should, but it would be this assembly. It wouldn't be the power of a presidency of the union or a commissioner to decide that the assembly exists. And the citizens would not be there for very long. So that's the vision. But can I just say as a last word, Max, that to respond to, because Huub also had questions, the point of our democratic odyssey is that we haven't, those of us advocating this, and there's also Bertelsmann Foundation that has advocated, with quite a few who've advocated this, this vision. We don't have all the answers. We are in a constant conversation because we don't think this should come just from above. It should come both from above and from below, from civil society, in a kind of in a great cooperation, and that should come from a big conversation. So we are trying to contribute to that conversation with the Democratic Odyssey. We won't all agree right away, but what we all want is a standing body. So citizens know that they have this voice and power. And I know that Anna has done lots and lots of work on this in her previous life. So
wonderful. Yeah, I think that was a good kind of final word on the topic of EU democracy here, like in terms of citizens assemble, because I want to use the last 15 minutes actually for a few citizens questions that are not like that focused on our 3 areas, but more also general questions. And one is from Katalin Halmai. She asked to Anna, but I think that's also interesting for the whole panel. In Hungary, some of the proposals were interpreted as a start of brainstorming on how to kick out member states that systematically violate the rule of law, such as Hungary, from close cooperation, ultimately from the EU. What would be your reaction to this? And I'm connecting this with a question I have as well, because we mentioned in several here those concentric circles about, deeper integration. So maybe you could actually start just explaining to us the 4 circles you're kind of envisioning, proposing here, and then I would love to hear Anna on this. What Katalin said, that the fear, especially of Hungary, to be one step out. 2.
Yes, absolutely. This is was actually also something I wanted to get back to. So the circles are not so much meant as concentric circles, and the Eurozone is in the middle, but we try to simplify a bit also what already exists, right? So there's the European Union, and within the European Union, we have, of course, already deeper forms of integration, Schengen, Eurozone. You're right that Schengen is both member states and non-member states, and so our circuits are a bit simplified. I fully admit that, that we are not very good graphic designers. It wasn't meant as there is a core Europe around the Eurozone in the middle, but it was really meant as a way to also answer our questions on the rule of law, as a matter of fact. So these circuits really came about through our discussions on the rule of law and the questions of how much integration do we think can happen without member states adhering to the rule of law. And at the end of the day, we said not so much, right? So what we really wanted to say with these circuits is that even outside of the current EU membership, the current 27, if there is any sort of association with the single market, any forms of integration without ever closer union, but if there is participation in the single market, it needs to happen within the rule of law frontier. So the main these circuits. So the main message of these circuits is really not that there are 4 circuits, but really this rule of law frontier, this red circle, that we see everything that is within it really requires respect for the principles of the rule of law, because, for example, we do not see how the single market could function with functioning rule of law principles. And then the outer circle is basically where we consider options for countries that would not like to integrate at all, that would not want to be part of the single market or any other policies, but that still see a point in of cooperation for geopolitical convergences. So this is the only sort of area where we see that perhaps the rule of law is less important. So these circuits are really more meant to be an articulation of where we see the importance of the rule of law, and rather than how we would divide different forms of membership in the EU. So it is no way meant to be hierarchical, and I see that it could look like this if you only look at the graph. I hope that it is in the report a bit better explained, but this is really the reasoning behind these different groups of integration, or stages of integration, not stages, but different kinds of integration that we foresee. And really, it's about this, what can happen within the rule of law frontier and what can happen outside of it.
Thank you very much. That was very clear. Anna, maybe on that, and the question of Catalan, the worries of Hungary and other member states, maybe that they are being pushed outside. How do you feel that? I mean, in the conversation with those colleagues, right?
Right. No, I think compared to a lot of the other ideas that are out there at the moment about stage accession and all these kind of things, I actually also, similar to how Chu explained it, I find the report of the group actually quite conservative on these questions, to be honest, right? In the media now, there was a lot of focus on these 4 circles because it's a nice graph and all this. But actually, when I look at it, it's really very much a description of what we currently have in a graph, right? We have the European political community. We have some form of an associate membership, as I call it here, with the arrangements that Switzerland have and Norway, for instance. Then, of course, we have the European Union, and within the European Union, but also going a bit outside sometimes, we have coalitions of the willing, Schengen, Eurozone, and such. So the current debates actually go very much more in the direction of bringing people or countries in, for instance, to the single market if they are not full members yet, and all these kind of things. So the group actually doesn't doesn't support these kind of ideas. So it's actually, I find it actually rather conservative on this whole idea of differentiation. Anyhow, about the questions with the worries, I think for me, at least, the guiding principle always needs to be that all kind of cooperation in the EU framework needs to be open for everyone else. That's also the principle of enhanced cooperation in the treaties. I believe that's also what I read out of the report. Of course, if certain standards are fulfilled, and here we have an issue with the rule of law, yes, indeed, but the rule of law is the fundamental criterion value of the EU. It's the fundamental chapter in accession negotiations, and we have currently several instruments to sanction countries like Hungary that are violating the rule of law in drastic ways. And the group makes a bunch of suggestions for how to improve those instruments. And in these instruments, currently we're withholding money. The group makes suggestions for how to make this process more efficient and faster also, and more applicable. And then we also have the so-called Article 7 procedure, where in the end, if we go through all the steps, countries can lose their voting rights, right? We already have that. And the group makes also suggestions for treaty changes for how to make this more feasible to achieve a majority for this withholding of the voting rights. But if I understand correctly, there's no mechanism that you suggest to push countries out, right? So therefore, I think within the worries, the realm of the report, these worries are unfounded, but also, of course, within the realm of our current government position. But what is clear is that we need to be better in protecting the rule of law, and thus also sharpen these instruments that we have.
I mean, one thing that connects to this, and it's another question here from the citizens, actually from a journalist, Harald Schumann from Investigate Europe. Many of you might know Harald, if it's that Harald, but I guess from the question. He asked the hardcore of the democratic deficit of the EU, and he puts that in apostrophes, is the opacity of the negotiations in the Council and its preparatory bodies. This denies reporters and citizens to hold their governments to account about what to do in Brussels. So the lack of transparency in decisions, especially in the Council. And Harald asked, why did you not address this issue in your proposal? That goes directly to 2.
We discussed this quite in depth. Especially on the democracy part, and we discussed the transparency in the Council very much. But again, at the end of the day, we had to drop a lot of ideas and suggestions for different reasons. Some of them because we think that it will simply be very difficult to implement, and that perhaps the space is better used for other suggestions. But this was definitely one part of our discussions, a big part of our discussions as well.
And we have another 5 minutes, and I might try to just get one of the hands here in. Maybe one of the citizens want to say something. We have Jürgen, Henke, and Birgit in here. I will just try whether Jürgen wants to say something. He has shown his hand for a long time. Jürgen, you may ask a quick question if you like. Unmute yourself now. And I will just have one question, so I will try the same with Birgit. We need to wait for the interpreters. Maybe they unmute themselves and can ask questions. And while we wait for this, I actually want to already give you the question for a little final. Oh, actually, no, one more question. Actually, I think this is something Ewald asks, so why are we talking so much I'm paraphrasing here, why are we talking so much about enlargement here? And really, the European Union doesn't work in many areas, he says, and we already have very big problems in the rule of law, and enlargement is maybe not right now. And I think this is a very political question, a strategic question. I wondered this actually as well, and I'm very prepared for this, is that within kind of the circles, and this comes back to what Kalypso says, like people that, you know, do a lot of work in the European Union and, you know, very much involved in European politics, for them actually enlargement is an issue, and they see that this is the window here. But when I talk like to friends, family, politically engaged people, like here in Germany, this is not something that is immediately on people's mind when they think about what are actually things happening in Europe right now, right? So enlargement, of course, yes, Ukraine, but generally that there is a big push, and that we are now speaking so much, and how the whole report was framed was very much in terms of getting ready for enlargement. So I wanted what that was Ewald said in a sense, and I can mirror it a bit. It's like from a citizen's point of view, enlargement is not what you would first think about. So maybe anyone has an opinion on that, or maybe can elucidate that a bit, and maybe there's something also to be done about this, because it doesn't seem to be the number one topic, as we're discussing it here a bit, I would say. Who wants? Anna? And then Kalypso.
Really a big problem that we're not talking publicly so much about enlargement, whereas actually in the capitals now it has become consensus that it's a geopolitical necessity that we enlarge the European Union, and that it will make us also safer and stronger together to do so, because we see when we leave these countries out, like Ukraine, like Moldova, also the countries of the Western Balkans, and then other actors gain influence here, and also the aspirations of the people in those countries are to be part of this community of peace and of freedom of the European Union, and therefore I think it's really in the people in those countries' interest, and also in our own interest, to really go ahead with enlargement, and therefore also get the EU ready for it. But you're absolutely right, we need to spark a public debate on this so that people really can follow this.
Kalypso?
I want to say two things. One is completely to echo what Anna just said, that let's remember that 20 years ago, in 2003, there was the Thessaloniki summit. I was there working with the Greek presidency, and the countries in the Western Balkans were promised that this would happen quite quickly. I mean, quickly enough. And 20 years later, it seems to many of them, they are in despair. The population's there. There's been backsliding. It's very difficult. Russia is very present there, China too. So it's a problem for the EU strategically. It's a problem for the populations. And enlargement has been pushed and pushed and pushed. So this moment is critical. I mean, it's kind of strange that we needed a war in Ukraine to kind of bring enlargement back, because, of course, we've now promised enlargement to Ukraine, and you can't do this without taking in the countries that have been waiting so long before Ukraine. So it's kind of contingent. It happened now, and it's very important for all the reasons we've all just said, and the working group says in its introduction. But I think that the question, and also the previous question on transparency, lead us to also say that all of these reforms are necessary. Enlargement or not enlargement, they are made all the more necessary by enlargement. But we have just had for 10 years, more than 10 years, the so-called poly-crisis, perma-crisis, Europe always in crisis. And all these crises, from the euro to migration, et cetera, and now the challenges of AI, all of this often leads to emergency decisions that are indeed opaque, decisions that are fast, and for good reasons. You need to decide fast. But, you know, for a polity, a group of countries that are trying to be democratic, it can't work forever like this, because the EU will lose really the trust of its citizens, or even the understanding of what's going on. So more transparency, more sunlight, that's what, you know, my working group cared a lot about too, is necessary either way. And making all of these EU ways of doing things that are so important, you know, more accessible, visible, readable, to the citizens is really key. Now, of course, with enlargement, we're facing a huge challenge. And so now it has become even more urgent.
Thank you. And I will, because we are out of time now, I just want to finish with one little round, which should be very quick. Actually, I want to ask all you panelists actually for the one thing you think you like most in the report and the one thing you are sad about not being in the report. So what's missing? What is your thing that's missing? And what is your favorite thing in there? Since two wrote it, I would give you the... You might have the fastest answer and give the others a bit of time to think about. So what's your favorite thing and what is your sorriest thing not being in there?
My favorite chapter is the rule of law chapter. I think both the narrative of the report the narrative of the report is very good, but if I have to pick one favorite thing, it would be rule of law. And of course, as one of the authors, my answer can only be that there's nothing that I miss in the report.
Excellent. Let's Kalypso. No, Kalypso, we can't hear you.
I'm not an author of the report, but I like everything in the report. I can say it more easily than the authors of the report, because you talk of a triangle, everything goes together. And I think at the end of the day, while of course, rule of law is very important, but the next frontier is enlargement. So the whole part on how to manage the enlargement process in a realistic way, in a pragmatic way, for me, is kind of the key that opens the other doors. And what is missing is what is alluded to, as Tu says, nothing is missing, but what could be deepened more. And that is including how participatory democracy and enlargement can be better connected. And so watch this space, because that's what we've been, one of the topics we've been talking about in the other working group. So, yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. So I see it's not really working what I'm asking, but I'm trying anyway. So I will ask Anna, and then the citizen's voice has the last voice then, last word.
What I like is this link actually between the rule of law and the enlargement discussion and the emphasis on it, really. What I thought was missing were transnational lists. They don't appear in the report. No?
They do in a footnote where we say we think they're great, but the council clearly doesn't want to adopt them, so we would just put them in the footnote.
Very good one. Huub, your last word. What's missing?
Yes, so well, like the rule of law as well as the qualitative majority voting. And I'm already mentioned that I agree with basically everything that's in the report. So, what did I want to say? The deliberative democracy, the citizen participation. If we deepen that a bit more, that would be nice.
Excellent. Thank you very much, everyone who attended today in this bit special Europe calling, I think. We're usually not completely in English, so everyone who is still here had really a good time in listening to us. I just want to say this is the start of the discussion. As you all have felt, we could have gone on for a few hours on the different issues, topics, ideas. There's so much to discuss. So we're actually continuing this discussion in a part 2, which will actually be on the 18th of October, a day before the responsible committee in the European Parliament will decide on its report. So another report, which is about treaty change. So going even a step further in terms of what could be done and what may be done. And we will discuss this with the members of the Parliament that wrote the report and experts and citizens as well. So be very much invited to this. For now, I just want to wish you a very nice evening. Thank everyone who has been there, our wonderful interpreters for their great job as always. And until the next Europe Calling, 18th of October, you know where to find us. Bye-bye. Good evening.